Hi and welcome to the quiz review. So this is a very quick review of the quiz that will take place on April 11th. So what's on the quiz? There will be 6 questions on grammar, all associated with combining sentences using relative pronouns and subordinating conjunctions. Then you'll have 4 questions on the slides dealing with academic writing that I've attached to this presentation. And then there'll be a composition on the 10,000 hour rule. So combining sentences using relative pronouns, remember that this information is also in your textbook in chapter 20, specifically on page 395. So relative pronouns are words like who, which, that, whoever, etc. And those words enable us to combine sentences. They make your sentences sound a little more sophisticated because you avoid just repeating similar words. Let's look at this example. A solution to the problem was the anti-graffiti network. The network offered graffiti artists an alternative. So notice how you have network repeated twice in this sentence, in these two sentences. So if we use one of these relative pronouns, we can combine the sentences and avoid repeating the word network. A solution to the problem was the anti-graffiti network that offered graffiti artists an alternative. The use of that is a little more correct in this sentence than the use of which. So that suggests that the rest of the sentence is key to the meaning of the sentence. If you had a less important idea, you could stick that in the sentence using commas and which. Let's look at the second example. The fossil hunters were excited by the find. They sold the fossil to a dealer for a lot of money. So notice that we repeat both fossil hunters, and then we have a pronoun, they, that just refers back to the fossil hunters. So rather than using they, we can combine the sentences using who. The fossil hunters, who were excited by the find, sold the fossil to a dealer for a lot of money. Notice that it is incorrect to use which when you're referring to people. And that's a common error that we see on student papers. So remember, if you're referring to people, you want to use the pronoun who. Now let's combine sentences using subordinating conjunctions. These are words like because, when, although, if. A couple of things to remember about subordinating conjunctions. A subordinating conjunction begins a dependent clause. So by definition, if you start off a sentence with a subordinating conjunction, you've created a dependent clause, and you're going to need to tack on an independent clause to make this a complete sentence. If you remember this rule, you'll avoid some of the common reasons for which students write fragments. So a dependent clause on its own is an incomplete sentence. It needs an independent clause tacked onto it. Let's look at this example. The program received national recognition in 1997. This is when President Clinton helped paint a mural. So you can avoid using some unnecessary words, this and is, if you just say when. When is a subordinating conjunction. You've now created this dependent clause here that's tacked on at the end of the sentence. It follows the independent clause. Notice that you don't need any punctuation. You could also say the program received national recognition in 1997 because President Clinton helped paint a mural. Once again, your subordinating conjunction begins a dependent clause. You don't need any punctuation here in the sentence. An important rule to remember about subordinating conjunctions: if your dependent clause begins the sentence, you have to use a comma before the independent clause. So let's look at this example. The artists would give up graffiti. They would not be prosecuted. So we'll combine these two sentences using if. If the artists would give up graffiti, comma. They would not be prosecuted. So you put a comma at the end of the dependent clause. If you were to switch the order of the sentence, they would not be prosecuted if the artists would give up graffiti. In that case, you do not need a comma. So it's only when the dependent clause comes first in the sentence that you put a comma before you start the independent clause. Another important rule about punctuation and these subordinating conjunctions is you never ever put a comma immediately after a subordinating conjunction. All right, let's switch gears now and talk a little bit about some composition concepts. So, of course, in college, we want to write using academic writing style as opposed to a personal writing style. So just compare these approaches. This is the slide I showed you in class. How are these two approaches different? In the first paragraph, the student author used the first person a lot. I, me, or my. Also used a personal example as evidence, had a conversational tone. So you see that when you see phrases like, but to tell you the truth, or in all honesty. The second paragraph uses the third person, students or they, uses statements from authorities as evidence, and avoids unnecessary words or expressions. The third person is preferred in academic writing. I think can be pointless. So if you compare these two sentences, I think that time management skills are important to being a successful student versus time management skills are important to being a successful student. You don't need the I think there. The second statement sounds more authoritative. This is not to say that you can never use I think in academic writing, but just minimize it. Use it sparingly. Finally, personal writing is subjective. You talk about your own feelings and opinions, whereas academic writing is objective. You put aside your opinions and look at others' ideas, even if you disagree with them. Very important slide here. Evidence is what you need to support your argument. So you want to convince your reader with facts, statistics, personal stories, statement from authorities, not just opinions that are not supported with anything. Of course, you're writing your argument, which is similar to your opinion, but with an argument, you support your ideas using evidence. So let's look at this example. Should cigarette smoking be banned in public places? Opinions versus arguments. Here's an opinion. Smoking is a disgusting habit, and I think smokers are crazy. Versus, since secondhand smoke is a carcinogen, it makes sense to prevent people's exposure to this. So the second sentence is a more effective argument. This is what you'll need for the last component of the quiz on April 11th. You'll need to bring to class the article we discussed on the 10,000 hour rule by Malcolm Gladwell. Also bring the worksheet you filled out. Those are the two items you can have with you in class. Expect to write 3 paragraphs. You'll need an introduction, and remember in the introduction to include the name of the article in quotation marks and the author. Your thesis goes at the end of the introduction. And remember that your thesis statement should suggest the main points in your argument. And then you'll have a body paragraph 1 in which you explain whether you disagree or agree with this rule. Remember to use evidence to support your view. And in body paragraph 2, you can continue either agreeing or disagreeing with the article. If you find you'd rather focus on something else, explain whether this 10,000 rule might relate to your life. And again, use evidence to support your point. That's it. That's the end of this review. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you on Friday.